Welcome to Marketing Masterminds. Today we're joined by Carly Brooks, the SVP and Counsel of Advanced Sales at Crump Life Insurance Services. Welcome, Carly.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. So I want to jump right in. The advanced strategies or advanced sales is really complex. So you're talking about estate planning, trust strategies. There's a lot that goes into that. So I almost imagine that financial planners have a hard time balancing how to promote that or how to really create content around that. They probably oversimplify on one side and they make it seem like everybody else, or they overcomplicate it to where the consumer can't really digest it or really understand what they're talking about. So they lose them before they even get started. How do you recommend that balance so people feel like confident in the content that they're creating and the way that they're building it out?
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. I think that's a great question and one that is really rooted in what we do every day in advanced planning, because it is sort of this striking this balance of taking something that is by nature very complicated and trying to distill it in a way that your clients or the planners that we work with can understand. And I think as financial professionals, sometimes they're walking this fine line of how do you balance that need to try to not oversimplify something, but also not lose your clients. And I think a lot of times, for me at least, the balance comes within understanding versus explanation. And what I mean by that is you have to really understand what your client's goals are before you start diving into the answer. And I can share an example of that where sort of on one end of the spectrum getting really overcomplicated, this financial professional called me recently and he had told me about a client he's working with. This client had come into significant wealth, very blue collar background, had no prior experience with wealth management or wealth planning. And the advisor went right into estate tax mitigation and all of these like really complicated, convoluted, multi-generational planning techniques that sort of on paper, we were excited talking about it. And I was like, okay, nodding my head, this makes so much sense for this client. And he said, no, I have to stop you. The client looked at me and said, you are the smartest person I've ever met, but I have no idea what you just said. And he's like, and now I can't get the guy to call me back. What do I do? Or what did I do wrong? And I was like, well, did you ask him what his goals were? And he kind of looked at me and was like, I didn't really. I just assumed he wanted to manage estate taxes. And it's, of course, I mean, that's kind of what we do day in and day out. But I think you have to first start with understanding what is the client's objective, and then we can start to look at different types of solutions that might be out there. So it's the same analogy of you wouldn't go to your doctor and get a diagnosis before or get a prescription before they diagnose you. And I think that's the same can be true within advanced planning, is that we sometimes rush to overcomplicate things. And it's not from a bad place. I think most financial professionals we work with, this isn't an ego thing. They really genuinely care and want to offer solutions that matter and that resonate. But if you get too complicated, you'll lose people right away. So I think you have to strike that balance, and it really comes from understanding goals on the outset.
So advanced sales implies that there's considerable complexity in the cases that you advise on. How do you strike the balance between making something sufficiently informative, talking about everything that goes into the process, versus the simplicity necessary for it to be accessible to people who don't live in this world every day?
So I think this has always been something that I've tried to do throughout my career, is have that balance where you are giving enough depth to explain a concept, but doing it in a way that's easy to understand. And so that's where I think a lot of what advanced planning is at its core is education. My parents are both teachers, and I always joke that I was like, I kind of became a teacher in a sense, because you're taking something really complicated. It could be a dynasty trust or something that has a lot of moving pieces and nuance. But instead of using all of the acronyms and the jargon and things that I think get us in the weeds, how I try to do that education is take something that's really complicated, but bring it down to its most simplistic parts or components. And so that means no jargon, no acronyms. I just did an analogy, but generally no analogies. Try to avoid all of that kind of stuff that to me is just noise. Never quote a code section. I think that's the number one mistake that I see advanced planning attorneys make, is they think they need to sound like the smartest person in the room. But I actually think there's benefit into taking something that is complicated and trying to make it more straightforward to understand for the client. But it's a challenge. It definitely is.
I think a lot of agents or advisors out there, some of them may be used to that quick sale. So it's more of that quicker conversion. And you can tell that, that the marketing that you did converted pretty quickly into that. And when you talk about these advanced strategies and trust planning and everything that goes into that, it's such a long sales cycle, and it's such a long just time frame of building that out. So as an advisor, how do they balance being able to be consistent with their marketing and create content and be out there without burning themselves out or getting into, habits of creating the same type of content all the time?
Yeah, I think those are great questions. And we do see this too. So I think consistency is the word that jumps out to me. And you do have to be consistent in your message and understand that doesn't necessarily mean, and I run into the same issue too, leading an advanced sales team where I'm like, what are we going to market this month? What's new and exciting to talk about? And sometimes it's actually just reiterating the same concepts and points time and time again and being consistent in your messaging that I think actually has better long-term success, because it is a long sales cycle. Clients and prospects and advisors need to hear things multiple times because these are, again, complicated things that we're dealing with. So I think just having that ability to stay consistent in your message. Don't act like you have to be the expert on all things at all times. You're not writing a textbook. You're trying to prompt thoughts, really, for people to reach out to you to learn more. So the ability to sort of stay consistent in that messaging, I think, is super important.
I love the fact of what you just pointed out about don't be afraid to keep repeating the message, because you never know when they're going to see it. And they may not go all the way back in your content to see it. So I think that's a great point. I love that.
And people need to hear the same thing multiple times. I mean, we all have busy lives. I need to hear the same thing. Yeah, be told multiple times. Your clients are the same way.
Absolutely. So on your advanced sales team, when you're deciding what to market and how to market it, do you have a single litmus test that you look to be able to determine whether or not something is too oversimplified or too complicated? How do you evaluate that quickly as ideas are coming up?
Yeah, so I think what I try to do is always have a variety of different materials and resources available for the people we work with. So how you talk to different types of what I call clients really matters. So for me, in my role, the advisor, the financial professional is sort of client number one, and then they are serving the end customer or prospect. So how we talk to or market to each of those different people along the sales channel or sales line, I think really matters. And so what we'll tend to do is maybe if there's a marketing idea or sales idea, a planning concept, we'll put out different types of resources that can resonate for different types of audiences. So knowing your audience, like you're never going to go into a room with a estate planning attorney or a center of influence and give them sort of the 101 piece. They typically want something that's a bit more technical. And so we try to create those types of guides. Similarly, you're not going to go to a client and, again, quote tax code and the nuances of how to draft the trust. We're going to lean on the client's attorney and planning team to help do that. So I think knowing your audience and having different resources is really helpful.
Do you look to take them on a journey, because there is so much education that is necessary, from starting at the point of what they know and then building upon that until you eventually address all of the complexity necessary?
I think so. So I think going back to the idea of consistency doesn't always mean an evolution. I think it does mean repeating your same message time and time again. But I do think by nature, as you start to have conversations with clients and with financial professionals, they're going to continue to build off of those earlier conversations, and by nature may get more sophisticated over time. So I do think so.
So as they're building out their strategies, and I know a lot of advisors, when they get started, it's about lead generation or, seeing those instant responses to different pieces or materials that they put out there, knowing this is a much longer game being played of providing content and kind of growing that trust. What are some key indicators that you think advisors could use to know, hey, this is working? Like, we're doing a good job.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question too. So, and this is a long-term strategic investment. I think I look at even just Crump and the resources Crump has put into our advanced sales team here. And that's huge. I think it is a long-term sales cycle. And it's harder. It's easier in some ways because we do individual case consultation, and you can say, okay, I talked to Mr. Advisor on this case for Mrs. and Mr. Jones, and then it led to a sale. So that's easier to quantify the ROI on, or the return on investment. But when you're talking about marketing content and materials and education, and that is arguably just as important, all that work that we do, it is a lot harder to, I think, quantify some of that stuff. And so that's where I think you can see it's working by the questions and the engagement that you're getting from the clients that you're working with. If they're asking questions or bringing things up, if someone might read an article that I wrote 6 months ago and say, I read this idea, like, can you tell me more? And that lets me realize that people are kind of going back to different things that we've put out there in terms of resources and content, and that it's working. So asking questions and showing interest. And then when you're having those conversations one-on-one with clients, I find that if to show that it's not working, that's pretty straightforward. Going back to making things too complicated, you start to lose people. They're zoning out, they get quiet, look at their body language. I think those kind of keys are good keys to show if the message you're sharing is resonating.
Carly, you said something interesting earlier about how you don't just work independently with your advisors don't just work independently with clients. They're part of a team. There may be tax planners, attorneys, estate lawyers, and the like. Can you talk about how you prepare your teams to work within that group of experts that ultimately brings about the best outcome for clients?
For sure. I think this is one of the most important nuances of what makes an advanced sales team successful, whether it's at the brokerage level or at the carrier level. It's this idea of how do you collaborate with a team, understanding you may be an attorney. So I'm an attorney. We have other attorneys on our team, but we're not the client's attorney. And that's a really fine line, I think, to walk is just that. It's like you want to be helpful enough that you can add value, but we also don't want to step on the client's attorney's toes. We understand that we're part of this bigger team and they're ultimately the decision makers. And I think sometimes where I see advanced sales teams fall short is that they use that we don't provide tax and legal advice as sort of a guardrail, and then they end up just really not being all that helpful. And so I think what we do really well at Crump, and I'm super proud of my team for, is sort of how we level set that expectation up front, is that we are a collaborative or strategic partner, but we are not the client's end attorney. So we'll get really deep in the client's situation. I think to be helpful, you have to ask those questions. You have to understand the client's situation. So we do get very deep in the planning, but ultimately we'll refer to their tax and legal counsel to make final decisions, and we'll coordinate some of those decisions and calls ourselves with them. So we're very collaborative in the process. We encourage the advisors that we work with to bring the planning team into those conversations so that we're all on the same page, that we can offer different options. And sometimes we have the expertise, particularly as it relates to complex life insurance, that some of the people on their planning team might not be as familiar with. So they actually really appreciate having us as a resource and a sounding board, knowing that we're all part of this sort of collaborative team.
I'm sure they do.
When you talk about the goals and you talk about the emotions that get tied into it, because these are big topics, the business succession planning, the trust strategies, these are big decisions that people tie into. How is it that the advisor can promote that without over promoting that they handle it all? How can they leverage the team atmosphere, the team that they have behind them, but put it out in a way of the marketing content to where they're not overstating what their capabilities or their qualifications are?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I see the most successful financial professionals we work with do is exactly that. They know enough to be dangerous. So I think to be successful in advanced sales, and we were talking earlier, you asked me, are more people getting into the advanced planning spectrum? And I think the answer is yes, because complex needs don't necessarily, we talk about estate tax exemptions, and the estate tax only applies to a very small percentage of Americans, but a lot of complex life insurance planning needs apply to everyday Americans, people that are business owners and wanting to do structures for their families. Maybe it's planning for special needs, or there's things that have nuance it's not only the ultra high net worth that we're talking about here. So I think as an advisor in the space, to be successful, you do want to know how to issue spot, and you want to know when to bring in your resources and how to use them. And so that's, again, I think where at Crump, we try to do that and understand that the people that work with us, the producers, have access to our team, and we can come in and help with that fact finding kind of behind the scenes, so then they're armed to have the client conversations more confidently.
It's a great opportunity for somebody that is thinking about taking that leap and getting more into those sophisticated plans or building out or connecting with more. It extends their business, basically. It gives them that longevity of their business. So it is incredible to know. You don't have to know all of it.
Right.
You just need the team that knows it in order behind you to help you.
Yeah. And as we're looking to wrap up, I'd like to just double down on that question. And if you're an advisor who's looking to build authority in advanced sales, where would you have them start?
So I think there's a lot of different resources out there. Of course, there's sort of the formal routes that you can take. There's designations, whether it's the CLU or the CFP. There's lots of different designations you can explore that I think help to build education and credibility. But it's also, I think, if you are a life insurance professional, choosing an organization that offers advanced sales as an option for you to access. So I think, like I said, our agents at Crump have access to our advanced sales team. It's part of what they get through being part of the Crump family. And so I think that is a huge differentiator, is having access to a team that can come in and help to provide that education. We have lots of tools, and we can help train, sort of informally train on different concepts or ideas, and then, of course, get on the phone with the agent or with their clients to have those conversations.
Awesome. It was incredible speaking with you today and having this conversation. I think there's been so much great information that's been shared. Thank you so much, Carly, for coming out and spending the day with us, and we hope to have you back again. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of inquisitive questions over those next steps in getting involved and the partnership with Crump. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today with another episode of Marketing Masterminds, and we look forward to seeing you again next month.